And our first guest is Angela Dewan from CNN. Angela is the international editor for CNN's climate team, and she spearheads the CNN climate coverage internationally and works to tell critical stories on how the global climate crisis impacts our everyday lives. So please give a really big change now, round of applause to Angela.
Thanks so much, Joss. And it's so wonderful to be here and see so many people here in this session and to be walking around this room seeing solutions everywhere. It's uplifting and it's making me feel very hopeful that we have a lot of answers. Optimism is something that I'm always being accused of, and that's because no one expects me, of all people, to be so hopeful. I spend every working hour that I have on the climate crisis, and it's not a cheery story most of the time. That's because I'm CNN's international climate editor. That's why I'm on this topic all the time. And I'm part of a very small but mighty team of journalists who are trying to get millions of people every day engaged on this biggest challenge the world is facing, the climate crisis. And that's all through the power of storytelling. Our job is to find the sharpest takes on the latest climate news and conversation, whether it's something as boring as air quality regulations or something as visually exciting as melting ice in Greenland. I'm convinced if it's important, there's always a way to engage people. Another part of our job is to make sure climate stories feature prominently on all our platforms. We have TV, we have a website, we have an app, social media. And with so much going on in the world, we're gearing up for a US election. There's wars in Ukraine, in Gaza. It's quite a challenge, but we do it every day. And I'm seeing promising results. We have hundreds of correspondents, producers and editors in many parts of the world, and we all work together. We share our expertise with them, they share their expertise with us, all to do what they do best, compelling stories. And some reason I'm optimistic is because I see the data every single day on digital, and I see that people are clicking on climate stories and they're engaging for minutes on end. They're actually quite fascinated with what their future world is going to look like. But I'll confess, even though I'm optimistic, the past 12 months in particular have really tested my cheery outlook. The last 9 months have been the hottest such months on record. Every single day for more than a year has been the hottest such day in our oceans. That's unbelievable. It's unprecedented. The alarms for ecological destruction are ringing so loudly now, the bells are breaking, and the words and the tools we have come up with to describe how bad this is are being tested to their limits. Scientists are now suggesting that we introduce a whole new category to talk about how powerful hurricanes have become. And it's the same for our oceans. There's a whole new threat level for coral bleaching. And we've reported on extreme weather for many, many years, for decades, but the extreme weather as we know it is now more extreme. How do we find the words to say that? How do we talk about this more extreme world? That's our challenge as climate reporters. We need to remind our audience how high the stakes are. And there's a lot of online content to compete with. So we need to tell people they're trashing the planet in a new way, in a worse way, sometimes even in a record-breaking way, as if destroying the planet that sustains our lives isn't shocking enough in itself. So my job as a climate journalist and editor is not just to report on the science and the technicalities, it's to be very creative, to get people to engage on this stuff. And increasingly, it's involving reporting on the absolute extraordinary. We are looking up to the sky for answers to this major challenge, not to some god or for some miracle, but for literal solutions. We're trying to see if the world can suck enough carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to slow climate change down. Some people are seeding clouds to relieve drought here or to prevent flooding over there, all without messing up our weather systems. And in some parts of the world, they're experimenting with spraying chemicals into the atmosphere to brighten up clouds, to reflect more solar energy back into space and cool the planet down. I'll be honest, this sci-fi reality sends a shiver down my spine, and it's really tested my cheeriness in recent months. But what is encouraging is I see that our audience is fascinated by this new world. They want to know which of these solutions are going to work, which ones are false, which ones they should trust, and what they should do about it. And another reason I'm optimistic is because we know exactly what the problem is and what the most urgent thing to do is, and that's to cut fossil fuels, to reach net zero by 2050, as the International Energy Agency, based right here in Paris, has suggested. We know that's the way out of this. Yet it still feels subversive to suggest that in some centres of power. We hear governments talking about this, but there's always suggestion of a wiggle room, a little bit of space to let a little bit of more oil and gas going for just that bit longer. And of course, it's fossil fuel companies that are still waging a campaign of misinformation. They have a financial interest in maintaining the status quo. But I get worried a little bit that the media too is not really doing its job sometimes in questioning fossil fuel companies' role. Why weren't fossil fuel companies leading the green transition? They were in the best position to do it. They've chosen not to. They've chosen to keep digging coal, oil and gas out of the ground. We don't question that enough. Instead, we expect fossil fuel companies to act just like any other business, in business interest, and fight to the death to keep selling their products, even though it's destroying the planet. It was Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism that unveiled the way that fossil fuel companies knew all the way back in the 1970s that their product was causing our climate to change in a dangerous way. But they chose not to share that information with anyone. They kept it to themselves. And once the world became savvier about what their products were doing, they launched a campaign of climate denialism, and that was a campaign that would last for decades on end and be incredibly damaging to our planet. Ultimately, journalism and science changed the narrative on all of this and triumphed over denialism, at least in most parts of the world. But increasingly, just like the tobacco industry found new ways of confusing people, the fossil fuel industry is doing the same and is on a road to delay. They want to delay the end of their product. I won't go into the fossil fuel industry's playbook. I think you all know it well. But their message is so strong, it seeps into our newsrooms, it seeps into our governments, our parliaments, board meetings, and sometimes even in your own home, where you might be talking about the next car you want to buy, or whether a heat pump or a boiler should be heating your house. And we're going to hear more positive noises about fossil fuels and combustion engine cars that should stay on the road for longer, perhaps, as we gear up for the US election. And that crucial election comes at an inflection point for the climate crisis. We know that this decade is crucial and will determine how bad this thing gets. Science shows us this is the decade to act. And of course, depending on how that US election goes, we could be seeing a shake-up of the world order once again. This can mean more instability, and more instability can determine what energy we use, where it gets shipped from, where it goes, how much money, how much focus will be on the climate crisis. It could also determine how much the US drills, and that's incredibly consequential for the planet because the US is the biggest oil producer in the world. More oil in the US is more emissions. It's all connected, and we are all connected. 2024 is a year where we're going to have more than 60 elections around the world. It's huge. And these relationships and powers are going to shift and change. And again, that will have consequences for our energy mix. We see this a lot with Russia. The West has tried to place sanctions on Russian oil, but Russia has still found lucrative markets in other parts of the world for their coal, for their oil, and their gas. It hasn't actually stopped the gas and oil flowing. Because in a certain world, in a certain context, buying oil from Russia, even if wind and solar is economically better for your country, keeping Russia as a partner might suit your purposes in a newly shaped geopolitical world. It's up to climate journalists, journalists in politics, business as well, to keep an eye on this. You, if you're sitting here and you're a journalist, you are the watchdogs of this momentous year. But sometimes I worry that the media really is losing the information battle. I often wonder why we don't simply ask fossil fuel companies, what is your end date? What's your exit strategy? When will you stop drilling and extracting oil and gas? We don't go that far because we accept that they don't have one. We accept that they're looking for ways to stay in business. Why is that? Journalists shouldn't be accepting that. And all this is happening as temperatures just keep rising and rising as the situation becomes more urgent. I also wonder why so many media outlets, including very reputable ones, keep demonizing climate protesters. Why is throwing soup on a painting so offensive? Is it disproportionate to the situation we're in? Why does it resonate so viscerally to see soup on a Monet, a defacing of art, when it doesn't resonate quite so much when we're destroying the very ecosystems that survive, that let us survive? It's because it's not new, and that's our challenge as journalists. We need to keep people engaged on these things even when they're not new. Even I'm bored of hearing about 1.5 degrees, record-breaking heat, pre-industrial levels. These are boring words. They're important, but they're boring, and they're not what gets people tuned into this very important story. They're very, very easy to tune out of. So what I'd like to do is show you what we're doing in CNN to keep people tuned in. We have millions of people come to our platforms, TV, website, apps, social media, every single day, and we want just some of those millions to stop just for a minute of their day and read about climate change and think about what they can do to affect change in their lives and to affect even bigger change. Our motto is go there, and there's no one who goes there quite as well as our chief climate correspondent, Bill Weir. For a documentary series called The Whole Story recently, he traveled all the way to Antarctica to tell one of those lovely, rare good news stories, the return of the humpback whale. And as part of that documentary, he looked into something as disgusting as whale droppings. But it was a fantastic little part of the documentary because these whale droppings are actually helping phytoplankton in Antarctica to thrive. And I didn't know this until I saw this documentary. Phytoplankton provides half the world's oxygen. Phytoplankton can absorb 4 times the amount of carbon dioxide as the Amazon's rainforest. It's incredibly important. So let's take a look at Bill Weir in Antarctica and see what he got up to.
And then they hit the jackpot.
Oh, we got food?
Whale stool sample.
Nice.
You got a good chunk or you want some more?
That should be plenty.
Look at that. That's the goal.
That's the gold.
That is the goal.
Joe, we have the food. We have the food.
New science finds that when it comes to Earth repair, whale poo has massive value. You see, when whalers wiped out 95% of the baleen whales, we lost the planet's biggest fertilizer pumps. One pod can take important nutrients from deep water and spread them across miles of ocean surface water, feeding the phytoplankton, which feeds the krill, which feeds everything from penguins to seals to whales.
They're the gardeners of the ocean, aren't they?
Yeah, instead of thinking of a food chain as going from one end to the other and stopping, it's much more like a circle. So they're literally seeding the upper parts of the ocean with the opportunity for plant life to grow, and that's what feeds the whale food. So you're right, in a sense, they're basically farmers. They're recycling nutrients. There's more food available to them the more they're around.
Now, I think the power of that story was just being in this crucial, important place in the world, but having this wonderful solution that gives people hope and reminds people that good things are happening too. The next story I want to show you is in Italy, a much smaller budget story, much closer to home. But here in the Apennine Mountains in Italy, they didn't have a single day of snowfall this entire winter. Yet they're trying to keep skiing, of all things, going with artificial snow. Of course, this is made by snow guns running on fossil fuels, making the problem worse. But these people have very little choice. It's either that or they let go of their family business that have run for decades. Take a look at this.
These mountains in central Italy used to be a favorite spot for local skiers.
Now the area looks more like a barren,
February is supposed
muddy
to be
wasteland.
the biggest and busiest month here at Campo
February is supposed
Felice
to be
ski
the
resort
biggest
in the
and
Apennine
busiest
Mountains
month here
in
at
central
Campo
Italy.
Felice ski
Not this
resort
year.
in the
As
Apennine
you see
Mountains
behind
in
me, all
central
of these
Italy,
mountains that are
not
brown
this year.
are supposed
As
to
you
be
see
covered
behind
with
me, all of these
snow.
mountains that
This
are
year
brown
instead
are
there just
supposed to be
hasn't
covered
been
with
the
snow.
snow. The only snow
This
you
year
see
instead
here
there just
was made with
hasn't been
artificial
the snow.
snow
The only
machines.
snow you see here was made with artificial snow machines.
The human-caused climate crisis has resulted in snow loss across the northern hemisphere.
Sorry, technical glitch there, but you get the idea. The power of that story was using that incredible drone image to really give people a bird's eye view of what's going on somewhere where people are doing something they can relate to, which is skiing. Another thing we think about is what our audience is into. A lot of them sit in the US, and in the US they've had severe water shortages for a long time in the western states. This story wasn't particularly visual, but it was about something that our audience cares deeply about. This story touched on Mexico City, which is just months away of running out of water. But when we do want our stories to be more visual, we have a fantastic visuals team and photo team and video team that make that happen. Some other colleagues of mine visited Iceland not long ago, and they talked about sea level drop. We always talk about sea level rise, but in some parts of the world, the sea levels are dropping. There's many reasons for that, but one of them is when Greenland's ice sheet melts, or as it melts, the gravitational pull that keeps the oceans close to the land actually weakens, and it pushes sea levels, or the volume of water, away, all the way to other parts of the world, like the Marshall Islands. So here we visit Iceland, and we use those strong visuals and take people on a journey somewhere different, and we show how that's impacting people on the other side of the world. Ultimately, this story is really just about sea level rise. It's basic science, but we use interesting ways to get people to engage on what we already know. And solutions are paramount for our audience. They love them. They can't get enough of them. We'll talk a bit about this later, but nuclear fusion is one of those solutions they're really interested in. Nuclear fusion is the same process that the stars and the sun use to burn so brightly, and scientists have for decades been trying to master this on Earth. If we get this one right, this will be all our problems solved, really, for climate and energy. The problem is, it's hugely complex, and it's not going to happen this decade, most likely. We had this story from some freelancers, actually, who are fantastic writers, but also fantastic photographers, who went right here in France, down to Provence in the south, and looked at the ITER project. This is really one of the most ambitious international fusion projects in the world, and there's a lot going on here. Every time we write about fusion, our audience is really engaged. And sometimes you've just got to have a little bit of fun. Who recognizes the Dippy Bird? Who's old enough here to recognize this thing? A few. This may have featured in your science classroom, or maybe it didn't, but scientists in China are looking at the Dippy Bird as a way to generate energy. They have found a way to use this energy to power things like your watch, your smartphone, and in the future, they hope this spreads around to millions, maybe even billions of people. So that's a short look at what we're doing at CNN. Some of these stories are fun, but they're real, and what I love about the Dippy Bird is this is something that's been around for decades on end. It just took someone to look at that and say, maybe this can be a solution for climate change. And who knows, this could be the one that makes all the difference. So many solutions already exist, and this is what keeps me optimistic. Wind and solar development may be the biggest answer to the climate crisis we have. The question is, are we going to get them in place in big enough volumes before it's too late? And the thing that makes me feel most optimistic, really, is people like you. We're here in this place where I'm told there are 1,000 solutions. That's really an extraordinary thing. And even though we have wind and solar, which is such a big part of the answer, we don't have the answers on how to store it properly. We don't have the answers yet on how to transmit it. And I'm really hoping that those solutions are here. We have EVs, but the batteries are still quite dirty to make. How can we take that technology forward? That's what events like this are all about. And if there are 1,000 solutions here under this roof, there must be 1,000 solutions under another roof and 1,000 somewhere else in the world. And with that many people moving in the same direction with that many answers, I think is an undeniable cause for optimism. Thank you.